I write for myself is read out so nicely. So thank you for doing that. But what very nice is these conversations actually been happening informally for a while now. Meaning, Anjani and I have been talking. Many of you who are involved with Lumina know that Stuart is coming, and we've been bouncing around the whole idea of, innovation and personality. So by no means, I think, and I can speak for both me and my co-criminal Anjani here, is this an intent to be like, teachers today, but rather like throw around some ideas that we've talked about innovation. For those of you who are Lumina practitioners, some of these conversations also bounced around on our group, where people are constantly exploring ideas of how to fit competencies into personality. So the way we are going to do is like literally Anjani and Rahul having a conversation. We of course got a few questions that we shortlisted, and we look forward to your input. Throw in your comments, questions, and also maybe somewhere in between we can take a pause and get people to jump in if they've got like ideas that they want to add, examples. So try and keep working the chat box. There's so much to say, so many resources here. So what I'm going to do is going to start off by just setting up a question for Anjani to ask, that given innovation can mean so many things to different people. Anjani, to you personally, what does it mean? And in your work, how do you say this playing out with the organizations?
Thank you, Sonam, for the nice introduction, and thank you, Rahul, for setting the context. And I'm going to straight jump in. I think thinking deep, innovation to me means progress, and it creates real, sustained value. So the idea is not what looks pretty, but the idea is what leverages, what pushes. And I want to quote Peter Drucker here, who says that innovation is the act that gives resources a new capacity. Look at a light bulb. It's always been there for hundreds of years. And yet we use it and we've leveraged it, we've, enhanced it in different formats. Um, and so to just add on to what I'm thinking of innovation, I'm also saying that it's not just the scale, it's also the pace, the speed at which innovation happens, small, tiny steps. So research from McKinsey shares that 70% of successful innovation is incremental rather than disruptive, actually. And this means that organizations are winning through small breakthroughs and then leveraging into larger scale space, right? Let's talk of Amazon, for example. In business, Amazon did not overnight come and disrupt retail. It didn't do that. It subtly came in and process by process. It made logistics as one of the process, built on it, and then innovated retail and took it to the next level. So I think that is what innovation for me is. And if I was to link it to Lumina Spark, then I'd say it's the shift that is important, and innovation depends on the personality strengths. Each person can innovate differently. Some are imaginatively, innovating. Some are process innovating. Some are working towards reducing risk. Some are simplifying processes, and so on. So, to me, innovation has a large space, wide. It's more panoramic than linear, and to me, it's got a lot that you can do with small steps, big steps. That's what innovation means to me. That.
Wonderful. And given that this whole thing of the hyper speed, right? Everything's so much about like the speed. The word disruption seems to have overshadowed innovation. It's very heartening to see that you bring this anchor, that in reality, if you look at the car that we drive today, still stands on the blueprint of the Model T, right? So absolutely. You also picked up example of Amazon, and our focus when it comes to innovation seems to gravitate to a lot of the new companies, right? The new gen companies. What are you finding that in your experience, these fast moving tech driven companies, who's actually bringing the innovation? One might argue that the company itself is an innovation, but actually when it comes to the innovation in these organizations, you know, is it the people at the center, or is it the people on the rim and the edges of these organizations who are actually creating innovation?
That's an interesting question. I think what's typically straight away coming to my mind is that, the edges of the organization are the people who are closest to the customers, operations, delivery experience, etc. And then there's the center, which is the support teams, the leadership, the administration. But it's the edges that notice things rather quickly, right? before it reaches the dashboards and so on. Again, I think bringing out some research from HBR, it's the frontline employees that identify problems up to 3 times faster than anyone else, any survey can even. There's a very interesting collective intelligence research done by James Swaricki, who talks about how diverse and decentralized groups consistently outperform individual experts. So while we are creating centers of excellence for innovation and creativity, it is actually coming from more diverse, more decentralized spaces. And just, taking an example of football, which is now showing up in a great way in the subcontinent as well. It's the tactical shifts that start, right, with the assistant coaches, the analysis, spotting patterns, and before the head coach can actually publicly go and say something. But a lot happens in the space where all of these people are in touch with the players and the game on the ground. So keeping that sort of thought in mind, I'm thinking if I was to put a Lumina lens to this, and I'd say that it's actually about cognitive diversity. Different personalities hold different insights, and it's the edges of the organization that are rich with sensing, practical thinking, so on, mainly pattern recognition. And then
Mm.
it's the innovation at the center by the leaders, or the GCC, or the that create the pathways. So it's a combination. There cannot be the edges and the center. I think everyone is equally responsible for innovation as long as the space for innovation has been created. You can't isolate one or the two. Each of us, in our small way, are contributing and being innovative.
Mm.
So I think that's the thought that's coming to my mind. But that sort of brings a question for me, actually, from my point of view for you, Rahul, which is, you know,
Mm.
when I'm saying all of this, I feel that while all of this seems great on paper and it's, good to sound with, uh, the whole concept is to understand the personalities better, to know who we are working with. And often a challenge comes in where one tends to look in one direction over the other. So when you work with leaders, Rahul, or when you see organizations and teams, how do you define innovation through this personality lens?
I mean, I also think of the idea that let's look at the personality lens. I mean, we tend to get biased about personality. We tend to have a very narrow view. So I don't know if these are jointed examples, but I remember early days we were running a session for a group of lawyers. And I was surprised to see that their what you might call more creative scores were very high, which tend to kind of be counterintuitive because every time you think of a lawyer office, you see 5,000 books over there. So I went to the head of the practice. I said, "Is this accurate? I mean, you people are all very creative, not too many stable scores." He said, "Exactly what we want." So I said, "Well, that doesn't add up because I thought you need to be like, deep seated into the rules and the structures." He said, "Nothing of the sort. You've forgotten. We are not in the business of applying the law. It's more about interpreting the law. So it's all about creativity. You can have the multiple interpretation." That was my introduction to the art of like, how it's such a creative process in many ways. So they said, we know where the books are. I don't need to memorize that. I just need to be able to have a creative context to how the law applies in the moment. That was a nice learning for me. So we tend to kind of like bucket hole people. So let me, and I'll ask my friends in the audience to kind of bear with me. I'm going to go back to like a favorite story of something I love very much. The other day, I was talking to somebody who is doing theology studies or whatever, and then suddenly tells me, he said, do you know which is the one book club which is stuck on the same book for the longest time? I said, what are you talking about? He said, "Yeah, the church." So I said, and I said, but I set up the story that from there too many innovations have come. And so my favorite story is the sport I played, basketball. And in 1886, sometime around in 1880s, Springfield, Massachusetts, um, because it was snowing so much, they needed to keep the monks and the clergymen all exercise. So inside the internal court, they would make people run around. And they in the internal stadium podium, whatever they had, they decided to make activities getting boring to just pass balls to each other. whatever leather balls they were passing around. And they said, okay, you know what, we're going to hang this peach basket because there was peach in the gardens over there. Hang it by the rafter. The rafter happened to be 10 foot high. And so, you basically chuck the ball in, pass the ball around and chuck it in. That was the first raw version of basketball. Till they figured out that people were getting better and the ball was falling in the basket. Now, every time somebody has to climb up and get the ball out. So, innovation. Cut the bottom of the basket. You don't have to go. And the game went on to improve from that. And the innovations continued to happen. When they did start to have different rules, and therefore basketball, because it was a peach basket, until the team started to travel. And that was like very rough part of American history. You went and played in an opposite team. There were miners and bricklayers and those kind of people. It was pretty common to get stabbed if you're playing against a team in the home ground. To protect the players, they started to put cages around the ground. And since then, basketballers have been called cages. All I'm saying is every story has to start to look at it. It goes to validate what you talked about. Maybe there was somebody at the center of that organization who had an idea. Put that basket up. We're sick and tired of passing the ball around. But then from then, the people on the edge kept innovating and creating something beautiful. So when we tend to narrow and box people by personality, imagining there's only a certain type of people who can do creativity and innovation. Well, the point is innovation is all about somebody ultimately moving the cheese, right? And therefore, we need the what we call in Lumina yellow. And I'm taking advantage of the language. I see a lot of people sitting over here, those creative minded, big picture, yellow types who will seed an idea. But then somebody has to move the idea. They're probably the influence driving reds, from the Lumina taxonomy, who will actually put wheels under that idea. Leave it to the thinker, things may not move at all. And then you got the blues who will bring the stability and the compliance. And then it is the greens who will bring and collaborate and inculcate not only that idea, but the movement of it and turn it into a culture. So I think in different roles, it's very easy to kind of flag out certain people and say that like innovation is not for them. Not true. So when it comes to the personality lens, because we are not just talking about creating products all the time, innovation is so much to also do with processes and making them tiny wee bit better. So like I said, like that's just like a theme around innovation from my point and taking personality into account.
Thanks, Rahul. And that's what is coming out in a larger space of innovation is, like you said, spread across for everyone. What often happens in these organizational conversations is that, and I don't know if you experienced it, I'm sure a lot of Lumina practitioners and a lot of us have experienced it. When we go into an organization trying to pitch for something, have a conversation, tell them that, discuss with them what is needed. And the request is that we don't have the type of people who can do it, right? And that's when the whole question becomes a big question mark, honestly. What is the type of people? Why do we say that people need to have a type in personality? And keeping it in line with the assessments and psychometrics and Lumina here in particular, how does that sort of not influence innovation
Hmm.
per se? So the question I'm trying to ask is, innovation is still associated with certain roles. How do we remove the type of that?
Yeah. I mean, roles, industries, all of that. So there was this one story that we'd heard in the early days of like me delving into psychometric about these two people who were architects, partners running setup of practice. The challenge was to the consultant that we've interviewed so many people, we just can't find creative, people who make the draft design. Just just lack of creativity over there. And so they finally decided to do the test, and the test didn't really show up anything with the people who were coming. They looked fine. And then in a brainwave, they decided to test the two partners who tanked very badly on the creative scores. So it's very easy before we declare that other people are not the creative type is to like have a look at yourself. Are you pigeonholing and boxing people in that? That's the question. Let me throw a couple of examples over here. So some of the things that we think are not the type, not amenable to innovation, are, for example, let's just say old school manufacturing places. I mean, like there's not a lot more to change, right? um, maybe like standard structure. But I remember listening to the story when I was creating the peer mentoring program for uh, Harsh Mariwala of Marico. And he shared the story, and I'll just sort of scrunch it to say, they said the core business was coconut oil. Okay, they collected coconut, they found the coconut oil, they bought the coconut, and they sort of crushed it, create. But then when he sat down, he found that the horrible looking tin cans were coming out, parachute. And then they start to say, okay, how do we best occupy the shelf space? How do we make it leakage proof? How do we actually turn our packaging into advertising? And they started to get a lot more traction. There was all this whole coconut oil war that happened with multinationals. That's another story which ostensibly Marico won at that time. Point is, they started to figure they were really making money not in the manufacturing but into the packaging and the marketing,
Wow,
right?
that's so fascinating.
To the degree that they got out of the manufacturing business altogether, completely exited. This is a marketing branding company. And you know what was the other venture then Harsh did after that was Kaya, that skin thing he did, because he
Oh,
discovered that packaging and all is that's where the action is. So you would say close-minded, family business and all of that. And I'm sure all of you is listening over here can think of multiple such examples where these traditional old things have bounced back. Now, I remember years ago, um, like we have so many examples, right? Like money, bank, such secure thing until ATMs changed everything. They brought bank into your house. But the one I remember, it was always a nightmare. When we go to these companies, we have to get frisked, especially some tech companies and all of that. And um, sometimes such a pain because then some of these ones are even more bureaucratic. And I remember TCS was such a effort because every time there's like those times there was like every cable, every wire, every floppy had to be questioned. It was like the holy grail. You go into Fort Knox, you just cannot go. The ain't tech. What happened to COVID? Suddenly every stuff is like terminals are sitting over there. Now every like the mummies around and the cleaning ladies around, everything's arrived at home. Where did the thing and things continue? So it's also so much about the mindset that there are ways to be innovative. And sometimes, as they say, necessity is the mother of,
yeah.
invention slash innovation. I also keep thinking many times I used to give the example of that how you can't compare, apples and oranges. Like people, like they talk about statistics, they'll say like, what if you had like different questions in the luminous spark? I say, but you won't get the same comparisons, right? Um, so So I remember like cricket, and those of us who are old school were with the purest of the 5-day test cricket. You know, uh, hey, we could go 5 days of test cricket without yawning, but then environment changed, needs changed, and it was like innovate or die. But there were enough purists out there. What an incredible sport! Now we got three versions of this. And what were you saying, Anjali? That somebody's talking about like 6 over cricket, or
6 over game. Yeah, that's what I found out recently. There's a discussion on that.
good lord. Okay, so there you go.
Yeah,
And
my husband feels very violated, like
I don't blame him.
personally.
Years ago, I met the guy who was heading ESPN for Asia Pacific, and I was there. I used to work with YPO that time. And the ESPN head tells, guys, what's next? T20. And we said, we wanted to kill him because we said, you don't want to be make it horrible like your baseball game. But look, he was right. So innovate, and then you suddenly have a sport with three. And you know what's the other one? My own sport has gone through that change. Now we have 3-on-3 basketball as an Olympic sport now. So it's happening every which way. But again, Anjali, to your point, I think many times when we are talking about innovation, it's not the disruption, but rather just incremental, gradual changes, and therefore it's not confined to just one or two personality types. We just picked up so many examples where innovation is just like it's an imperative. It's just happening.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah.
So switching gears,
Mhm.
let me just also turn it to ask you the question that now we talked about it's happening everywhere. But what, in
Yeah.
your view, are the most common challenges that impact innovation at the organization level? What's blocking it up?
I'm going to take an example from my personal life. So, one of my very dear friends, I'm going to use Lumina language just before this. One of my very dear friends, I've known her for a very, very long time, and I've known her to be blue and green all of my life. And when she started a business in the space of creativity, she came to me and she wanted to show me the name of her business, and we discussed it. And I said to her, look at the bias, right? Like, this is me. And I'm someone who loves psychometric evaluations. I'm someone who's a very, very creative person. Creativity is for me my go-to, it's my meditation. And I'm sitting in this conversation with her. She's in a completely different country, 12 hours away. And I said to her, but I know you don't have creativity style in you. So why are you going in this business of creativity? And today she creates way more and much better than I can even imagine to do myself. And this is someone who thrives on creativity, right? So I think the first and the foremost barrier is bias that we bring to the conversation, our own biases. I mean, this is someone I claim to have known very well for 20 plus years of my life. And then I turn around and say, I seem to know her well. But what she creates is phenomenal. Um, the second thing that I think is psychological safety, and I'm going to talk about, Amy Edmondson said, her research says that fear shuts down learning, and learning is the innovation of, engine of innovation. So what I find very fascinating when she says that in her research is that if you are worried of what's going to happen as a result, you're not ever going to be able to bring innovation in the space. You may still be creative, but that doesn't mean that you're being innovative. They're next to each other. Um, and there is an example from Pixar, I think, wherein the conversation was that I'm trying to recollect it. Ed Catmull is the name of the Pixar's co-founder, and they figured out that the junior animators were too scared to open their mouths in meetings because the people around them had more experience, clout, authority, and whatnot. So every
Mm.
time a meeting would happen, these young people who could be more creative than many of us sitting in the room, for example, were not really saying anything in terms of process or ideas or any of that. And Ed Catmull realized that that's not going to take his organization very far. So they created a internal foundation or an internal resource called the Brain Trust, a forum where everyone, regardless of the title, could openly critique the best work in progress. So some of the best work was then critiqued and analyzed. And what the promise over there was, there'll be no penalty. This will not be brought out in any PDPs. It was a simple rule. You're allowed to give, you're allowed to be, you show candor without any consequences. And suddenly the organizational innovation just shot up. People had all kinds of ideas coming in. So the second challenge that I see in a big way is psychological safety, which organizations try their best to create, but somewhere, because of our biases, because of the cloud, because of our relationship with authority, we do it unknowingly. And then there's this PwC research which says that 50%, almost 50% of the people employs hold back ideas because they fear negative consequences. Now that is almost, so it's almost signals a systemic issue more than anything else. And it's hard to dissect that systemic issue. It needs to trickle from the top, bottom, sideways. One doesn't know. Every organization comes with its own set of challenges. But if there was a focused way of creating space in innovation, then this would be one. Give people the room to go wrong. I remember being in a conversation sometime back with one of the business leaders, then with Johnson and Johnson, heading India, Johnson, and he said, when I started work, my boss told me it's okay to fail, but it's not okay not to try. So that
Mm.
whole space, he said, when I got that space to fail, I innovated so much in sales that we as a division and then eventually as an organization grew multifold. And so to me, I think if I was to take that liberty and say, what does Lumina Spark do here? I think it adds that layer of understanding. When Organizations are expecting everyone to innovate, but there are some who are sitting in the room and not able to say it immediately because they are the reflective types, and then the others who are ideating on the go. And then creating pressure for everyone to be creative or innovative creates overextensions, challenges the limiting beliefs, brings in saboteurs. So I think finding that space, brain trust, what a brilliant idea by Pixar, or something like that, to create psychological safety for organizations can be one extremely supportive way of creating openness and innovation in an organization.
Yeah. And I think you've said it so well. This whole idea of creating that psychological safety, the space, and many times taking out the structures that inherently will create some kind of a judgment or
Yeah,
evaluation.
yeah.
So, I mean, all our friends in the group who are listening to us, many of them will have these case studies nailed down. But Google, when they had mandated a certain amount of hours for people to go and try anything, right? And the skunk works that they used to call them at the back, that people will take time out and they're just going to play and create something. And years ago, I remember I was the kind of guy who could just read a few summaries every now and then. I'm not much of a reader. But there was this book called Slack,
Yes, yes.
right?
Yeah,
And
fantastic. Yeah.
yeah, and given that I wanted to be a professional afternoon nap taker, I thought this will inspire me. Slack, I like the term. But there was a lot of meaning in it. Is it organizations that don't have Slack, like, sort of stretched so tight next to each other? So we need the creative Slack. That's what we need to create. So, in as a reflection to what you said, Anjani, if you bring the personality lens, and I want to pause for a second because I realize not everybody over here may be Lumina conversant. So all we want to tell you is that when you look at Lumina, when we refer to the colors, you know those colors. I mean, if we say somebody's red, what are the pictures that you see with red, right? Fire, blood, anger, red roses, and all of that. It represents a certain energy, the energy of being driven, the energy of driving influence. That's the red kind of person. Same for yellow, optimism, hopeful, sun, sunflower, those kind of things. Green is about life giving, green, nature. And the blue is the stability and calm. There, you got it. You got the four colors. Lumina, thankfully, so intuitive. It takes a minute and less to download. So we don't want to kind of isolate those people. But if I come back to those four colors now, it's possible that maybe the yellows with their excitement and optimism and frankly unhinged positivity start to shoot off the ideas. But what are the kind of things that can encounter their psychological safety, right? You would think the stable blues will protest more, but that's not always the case. The stable blues are just looking for compliance. They just have a need for some safety questions. If they got them, they're okay with innovation.
Correct.
Sometimes they're challenged by the reds, right? The reds who want to say, but what are we doing this for? Idea is fine, but you plan to execute on this. You're going to do something. They want to know, like, is it going to create something? I need to see something concrete. The greens, who our first reaction is that who are we going to offend if we try something new? They're so worried. So they need to understand that how is this going to make life for myself, people better? How is it not going to isolate and leave people behind? But what happens to the pure yellows? So some part is, yes, they may get challenged, but some is their own nature might shut them down because they
Correct.
might, yellows because they come with ideas without legs,
Yeah.
they get challenged and threatened very easily. So there's an ongoing dynamic. And I think psychological safety may on the surface sounds like an easy to do thing, but it takes into account all of these personalities, right?
Mm.
So talking about that then leads me to the next question for you, Anjani, that what does what kind of a role can systemic culture play over here to enable innovation in organizations?
When you were talking about the example you just gave, two thoughts came to my mind. One is Google's Project Aristotle. So it demonstrated that psychological safety is the strongest predictor of high performance, and it enables people to speak up and so on. Right? The second thought that came to my mind immediately is, have you heard of something called the andon cord in Toyota factories? It's my favorite example, and I'm going to tell you about it. So
Yes,
every
it's a familiar name, but yeah, please.
yeah, so in Toyota factories, there's something called an andon cord,
Mm,
and anyone on the factory floor is allowed to stop the entire production line if they spot a problem by pulling the and-on cord.
Oh, yeah.
And what is fascinating is that the leadership or anyone on the job floor is not allowed to ask the question of who messed up, what is wrong. The question they have to ask is, what did you find, and what is this system going to teach us? So while it may, imagine you have to ship out 100, whatever, 50 cars today. 150 is a very small number for Toyota, but let's say 150 cars today, and you stop the production line because someone spotted a small error. The whole team comes together, huddles together, and finds innovative ways of making sure that system is solved and still the production is out on time.
Mm.
That is the culture that's been almost inculcated into it. And I somehow find that so fascinating. And so when you go back to thinking about, Project Aristotle by Google, it talks of psychological safety and the example that you gave. It talks about candor. I think I want to use the word, it's a strong word, and let's not go only by the dictionary, but by perception and a lot more than that. The word for me is permission to think differently. And when I say
Mm.
permission, it is not that we're seeking for any permission from anyone, but literally allowing us all to think differently, allowing us all to ask the questions that are uncomfortable and not getting offended by those questions, but actually stopping, pausing, and saying, okay, when this question is being asked, what does it really mean? Why is it coming out now?
Mm.
And that's what a lot of organizations have, succeeded in doing. They have given the permission, for lack of a better word, and you can put any word there, but really opened the space for its people to set up an area or I don't know, a universe where I can say, I have a problem, and this is how I have a problem. Come, let's solve it. Instead of saying, how dare you bring a problem and you have nothing to solve. And I want to go back to when I was a young Turk in an organization, and one of my favorite bosses till date would, every time I walked up to him and I say I have a problem, and he would say, "Don't come to me with problems, come to me with solutions." This could be viewed in two ways. The first one was I didn't have him as a resource or anyone as a resource to look for solutions, which felt a little lonely. But on the other hand, he pushed me to be innovative and find solutions on my own, find resources on my own. So over a period of time, I learned that I have to walk up to the stakeholders with a new idea, not just a problem. And one of the most recent workshops, we were talking about this, a whole debate on why do we only walk up to our stakeholders with a challenge? Why don't we say, here's a challenge I see, here are the two different ways of solving it. What is your thought? And collective intelligence, going back to what we talked about earlier, can impact the whole process in a very um, positive manner, if I may. So I think we all should have an and-on cord in our workspaces. I think that's what we should all have. That's where everything can sort of, be, well, I wouldn't say everything can be solved, but everything can be put in the space of innovation. But as I'm
Yeah.
saying that, Rahul, and listening to the story you gave about the basketball and the invention of basketball and so many such things, I wonder what would have, had this been in the space, bringing it into the space of workplace, if something like this was happening, how would a leader at a broad level, how would their how would they encourage innovation? How would their personality impact innovation? And you touched upon it briefly, just as you were explaining Lumina Spark to some of us. But I would love for you to go a little bit more in detail to tell us. Imagine that, a new innovative idea came about, and then there's a leader's personality. What do you see there? What are the overextensions? What kind of behaviors could come out?
I think you're right. I mean, not just the Lumina example, but this whole idea of psychological safety, Lumina or otherwise, I think is a big one. And that plays out everywhere. Human beings operate from fear, and the first sign of judgment makes us recoil, right? And large number of people would rather comply than create, and therefore end up conforming just for the safety of it, right? And that shows up every which way. That shows up in sort of not opening up, that shows up in tried and tested. And as organizations go bigger, it becomes harder to pin responsibility on someone.
That's
So
true.
everybody can hide in that bubbled crowd. So I think psychological safety, absolutely. Now, when it comes to leaders, one again, that's also a very highly abused word. So, mostly we are talking about senior managers, right? With a flattering title of leader given to them, because we also like to do it as consultants, mid-level leaders. so, so yeah, because essentially most of the people that we deal with, work with, are fundament leaders, like managers with seniority, and and therefore they are people who are responsible for getting things done. So they have their hands in the field. Recently, another person from a Lumina community was talking to me about a change in an organization where a new leader is coming. Right, he's replacing a leader who allowed a lot of sort of free flowing activity. There was a lot of room for people. Right? He was more interested maybe in the relationships. So on the surface, he might have looked softer, perhaps also casual, and then as a reaction to it. But the organization was doing well, and they thought, okay, if under this kind of guy's watch, they're going like this, maybe there's room for more if we were to put some more, you know, uh, turbo into it.
Yeah.
Then they ended up with a different kind of profile. And what this our consultant friend was like tasked to do was like how to bail this cat, because they've got this guy now who's
Mm.
so hyper organized that he's already lined up the catch up meetings with every different department up to 4 months down the road.
Wow. Okay.
And so obviously this guy's got like, an addiction for meetings, and therefore people like that tend to dominate the meetings.
Yeah.
What's
Yeah.
beginning to happen is now the question that people are asking is, when do we do the work? Because
Yeah.
EF meeting now requires a sophisticated presentation.
Correct.
You know, so different leaders. Okay, so in simple terms, I think all leaders need to bring their own awareness. How is a leader's personality influencing innovation? I think the leaders need to turn the mirror at themselves before they unknowingly either run away with ideas or block them completely. They need to focus on their need and communicate it to their teams. I'm a blue leader. Make sure that you give me some research, right? And you give me that tech feasibility. I'm not interested in an idea right now for 2035, but tell me what we can do in 2028, 29. Like, just give me something real that I can put my hands around. That's my need. So I think the leader needs to communicate to say, hey, you want to be able to get my sign off. Here's what you need to do, right? The Reds obviously want to know, hey, how's the bottom line going to move up? Of course, many of the Reds may not say it, but they might also want to whisper them. How will it make me look good?
Yeah.
so,
Of course.
so there is that need, right? But and the yellows want to be part of the creative process. They said before, I get bored with the tried and tested. Um, so they want to say, how can I signature a paradigm shift? How can we have room for radical change? And the green people are basically looking for, help me understand how this is going to make lives better, and I'm for you. So I think it starts with leaders first doing some self-examination. Don't we always say it begins with you,
Yeah.
right? And therefore also knowing and acknowledging your biases, your preferences, and stating them out rather than letting people figure out what your need and want is.
Right.
So for me, fundamentally, that's what it is. I think the leaders can enable and influence and support innovation if they can help people understand what is it that they need to stay out of the way of progress. Mm.
I like that concept, what you're saying in terms of self-awareness. I think starting from self, knowing
Mm.
what I need, and then having clarity of communication and saying, communicating after understanding. However, the crazy part in all of this is the pressure, and suddenly
Yeah.
everything flips. And we've seen it more than once. We've seen it in our corporate lives. We've seen it as consultants. We've seen it at home. Every day
Mhm.
I get up in the morning and I say I'll be very nice to my teenager, and then pressure happens of time, of delivery, of outcome. I don't know what it is. And things change literally very quickly. And so, taking out just the context of leaders, but effectively in an organization, when the pressures mount, Innovation often changes shape. It's fluid like that almost. So, what kind of leader biases do you think you most often see that limit innovation? Maybe asking
Okay.
two pointed question, but the idea really here is to understand default styles and overextensions and all of that.
And here I have to go full confession. I mean, like the idea, of course, is to rely on the Lumina framework and not make it about Lumina. But the truth is that we can pretty much detect uh, not just like how leaders will show up under pressure and how they're also going to react, which is going to put up different kind of barriers to
Yeah.
possibility innovation, right? Let's start with the greens, maybe. Okay, now so the greens are the people I'm going to just, and I'm not going to go outright in the Lumina language. I noticed that more than half the crowd is like non-Lumina, so I'll give a disclaimer, right? The people-centric, the green leaders, who we call them, right? In Lumina, they are going to like really struggle first of all when they're under pressure on how to sometimes even put their point of view out, because at heart they like to be liked. They don't like to avoid conflict. So even not speaking up sometimes can derail innovation. They might not flag, they might not challenge the idea, they might not bring something that's relevant, right? So I think those are the things that might come up with a green leader, that the leader may not play the leadership role in trying to accommodate everybody. How many times they'll allow things to slip before they hit a point of no return, simply because they didn't want to kind of. So the green leaders tend to kind of, I think, do a disservice by not stepping up at the time sometimes, I think.
Yeah.
As Lumina coaches, we've seen some of these things, right? As we coach people, because it's kind of like it's written right here. Okay, so wait for their story and say, it's this. You did this report, it's written here for you. It's now confirmed in real life. The blues, I think, because they kind of go into hijack mode every time there is non-compliance. Unpredictability is something they can't handle. So every idea of innovation is basically a departure from the tried, tested, and the narrow paths, right? So that's the way it has to be. You know, I mean, to get into the ocean, the boat must leave the shore and all of that. So that happens and they get hijacked. And sometimes what happens is when all of us go into stress, Anjani, we lose our executive functioning, a lot of it. The hormones flood us and we are not thinking very productively anymore. You've lost the ability to say that, listen, I think you've got an idea over here, but I don't see the feasibility. No, that language is gone because you've kind of got hijacked. So now you're coming with a judgment and saying, look, you know what, I'm shutting the press down, right? And then you have this cascading impact and the inability to like hear that pressure, that loss of composure. They shut it down by simply becoming rigid and applying rules. Their interpretation of rules tend to be binary, black and white.
Right.
Where the reds tend to do this service, of course, is that they don't allow sometimes space and time that is required for innovation ideas. They tend to have hold hard evaluation, like sort of evaluate on bottom line numbers and all of that. So the results have to keep showing up constantly. But we know for a fact that innovation sometimes is a slow cooked dish. You need some experimentation. It's not many times, or most times, you have to have somebody who has a mindset that's not waste of money, but rather investment in a new idea, right? I mean, how many times did you have to like burn a light bulb before you got it right? So talking about the light bulb idea. Now, finally, we are inclined also, and in a very biased way, think it's those creative, optimistic, upbeat, cheerful yellows who are the source of idea. No, they are also oftentimes, many, many times, responsible for blocking innovation.
Yeah.
It's counterintuitive. But their impulsivity, their activity, because to their head, everything looks like a good idea and a possibility, they can jump into action too soon.
Mm.
At a time, it's an idea that has no strategic fit with the situation.
Right.
Oftentimes, sort of, kind of pre cooking ideas that time has not come. So it's not like the yellows, because they're creative, don't contribute to ideas. They do. And also their framework, they can also flood other people around them with over
Oh, totally.
ideation,
Yes.
right? It's a, and because many of their ideators don't have the doer side in them, when you visit them again to expand on the idea, they've already forgotten the idea of yesterday. And they've got
Correct.
10 more, and people say, it's not happening. So these are different kind of things where I find that leaders sort of go down the slippery path when they are under pressure, and in their own way can become a threat to innovation opportunities.
Hmm, interesting. Can I add one more question to that, Rahul? There is a part which is it's very Lumina language, but I want to bring it out here, and maybe for the non-Lumina people, you can expand it a little bit here. The journey to composure. How do we move when we are stuck there? Is there a quick? We've understood the personality. We know where we are. We are trying to stop the pressure cooker from bursting. What would be that one or two quick things we should do after we are aware?
I mean, I think to that, sometimes trying to find those answers when you're in the middle of the hijack, I think is the worst time to try something.
That's true.
But at the same time, we also have to acknowledge that there are things that hijacked us in the past that no longer do. I'm going to pause for a second and throw this to everybody. If you go back 5, 10 years in your life, think about some people who put you into a state of hijack simply by being around or opening their mouths. Or there were certain questions and situations that sort of took you out of efficiency. And you know what? Over time, you've grown out of it. That person doesn't bother you much. Those situations you don't care about. You've let it go. But you know
Yeah.
why? Because you gave it time, you gave it evidence, and then you understood that a lot of this stuff was happening in your head. It was the activation of a core wound, or
Yeah.
just fear of the past experience. The maybe it's like that person who went to a forest, saw a tiger, and every time they saw grass and a rustling sound, their head saw a tiger, kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you got out of it. So those overextensions, we all, if we have support, see, the brain that creates the problem can't solve it. So you need to have
Hmm.
someone to talk to. I mean, I
Hmm.
think problems get sorted not by regurgitating, but rather giving them a witness by having
Hmm.
conversations.
Hmm.
So I find that when we sort of explore what happened, some of the
Hmm.
people may be doing deeper work over here. I find like, emotional freedom technique, EFT, a lot of people like replay the history and all of that.
Hmm.
So, so if we relook at how in the past, when we had certain situations, ultimately we calm down, right? We calm down from all the worst of situations. What we never spend time on because we don't have a sounding board is what made us calm down, right?
That's right.
Right. So, for example, I may have get reacted because when somebody kind of stalled my idea, I'm a high yellow, right? Of course, I launch ideas like that without like giving it much thought, but I get challenged also easily if somebody puts a question. So that question, but I need to apply my empathy and collaboration, which I also have. And by the way, you don't need to have high scores. We all have personality traits, high or low. So I can always choose certain behaviors. So if I consciously choose, ultimately in the past, being empathetic to the person's need for that data, the spirit of collaboration to have peace allowed me to kind of calm down. So that's one part, is that we all go through certain triggers and we have a natural reaction, but we also unknowingly have some coping strategy which allows us to
Right.
get back to composure. The trick
Yes.
is not that. Emotional intelligence is understanding what's going to trigger me in the future and be
And that
prepared.
makes it sustainable. Yeah.
Correct. And a simple example of that is there was this guy who used to come over, to our house to us, help us out. This guy was a wrestler by training, sort of
Hmm.
a rough and ready background. And I remember the first time I met him, his
Hmm.
tone, his sort of, blunt way of talking made me think he's being disrespectful. But then I found him talking to his mother on the phone the same language. And I realized that, okay, he's not going to trigger me again because I know my interpretation on him is not accurate. So know your trigger,
Hmm.
know what's helped you to calm down in the past. But better yet, how will you anticipate what behavior will you dial up next
Yeah.
time your mercury is rising? That's what it is.
Thank you for that's a tip that I'm taking back with myself. I just told you the teenager in the house.
Oh yeah.
The other triggers are always on. Right. So, last 7 minutes for this conversation, I'm already having FOMO. I wanted to ask you one last question, quick, short take on it. If leaders want to innovate across all roles, not just creative ones, then how would they open this box? What should they do? The shift in the mindset.
Yeah, and I'd like to like hear your view also. I mean, I remember we were talking about mindsets when we were having another conversation. But and I'm gonna give a very short, tight, simple answer for this. I think when we come to the facts that I don't know what I don't know, and then add the idea that I'm curious about what I may not know, I think that's when the growth starts to happen.
Mhm.
And I think that's the beginning of curiosity rather than compliance and conformity, you know. So, so for me, it's like the curiosity.
Curiosity. I want to take this quick example from one of my favorite authors, actually, Carol Dweck. She's written a book on mindset, on growth mindset, and I love, what she says. She says that um, growth is directly proportional to innovation. That's
Mm,
like my takeaway from all of this. So a part of it is what curiosity. A part of it is the example from Mars, the company Mars, and behind the M&Ms and M's and Snickers, there was a time when all R&D could only be done in the kitchens. You're not allowed to go
mm,
anywhere. And then the sales were going down, and there were other competitions in different formats coming up. So then one team somewhere was given the permission to, if almost, said that, can we involve the factory line workers to see what they think of this? They're just looking at it. Can we involve the people on the shop floor? And suddenly there were experiments on waste reduction, consistency improvement. And then a team was set up to say, don't ask questions on this, ask questions on what can we do next? Ask questions on what have we learned from here. So this whole context of what Carol Dweck is saying a growth mindset assumes that people can develop capabilities through effort, feedback, and learning. And
mm,
growth is directly proportional to innovation. So if people believe they can improve, they will experiment. So
yeah,
curiosity and belief together add to innovation. And on
yeah,
that, with 5 minutes to go, Sonam, we would like to hand over this conversation to you.
yeah. And so Lord, I recognize that they may not be all Lumina practitioners over here, but there are people who might be using other psychometrics. And, I'm a believer that the practitioner is more relevant in the conversation more than the tool sometimes. Just like the human being who's done the test, they are bigger than the report. The report is just a map, but the real territory is the human being, right? So, with that, the one thing I want to add to all of this, and I think I'm talking to myself in doing this, I think it's very easy to get a fixed mindset when you start to overbelieve in your tool. I love Lumina. Okay. It's done so much for me personally. My art journey, my parenting journey. Lumina is my soul connect. My teacher was Hogan. But it's also very easy to get a fixed mindset when you start to overbelieve in that one tool. So, I'm also want to like close the circle by sort of saying that keep an open minded. This person in front of you, be curious about them and why they do what they do. Okay, now definitely, Sonam, you're up.
Thank you so much for this amazing, amazing session, Rahul and Anjani. I really enjoyed the examples and the experiences you guys shared, and I hope our audience did too. I would like to open the stage now for questions, and I invite the audience to ask questions if they have any,
Or comments. I mean, like,
or
anybody who's
comments,
like,
any
yeah,
kind of
absolutely.
perspective they would like to share.
I see a thought by Dia, which highlights the need for diversity, and Dia, absolutely. Psychological safety and diversity are hand in glove almost. And you have brought that point on that innovation will happen if you feel you're in a diverse space, diverse ideas, diverse physiologically, psychologically, and all of that. So thank you for bringing that up.
I think there were many key takeaways from the session that innovation is definitely should not be reserved for a certain type of people or role or personality. And what role does psychological safety play, in enabling innovation? And there were so many relevant examples. Really enjoyed the session, and of course, growth mindset,
Yeah.
the the most important factor in fostering innovation.
So now I thought Solen had a comment. Solen, did you go off mute? I saw you.
Yeah, please.
No, 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 no. But thank you very much. It was really interesting. And what I will keep in mind among all the great ideas was also not to jump too quickly labeling people, because it's true that Lumina, the yellow, the blue, the green, and that innovation can come from blue people And yeah, be careful about labeling too quickly people around me.
Cool.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you guys for this session, for attending the session. Thank you, my audience. And before we
Thanks.
close the session, I would like to invite you guys for our upcoming session. It's an experiential certificate program with Dr. Stuart Desson, our global CEO and founder of Lumina Learning India. He'll be joined by Rahul Baswani, and we'll be having this experiential certificate program in across 3 cities, Delhi, Mumbai, and Bangalore, in late Feb and early March. I am dropping the details in the chat, so you may check out the registration page, please. And for more info, you may please get in touch with our team. I'll be also sharing our email ID. Hope you enjoyed the session.
Well,
Any
if
last
people
thoughts?
could,
Thank
yeah,
you
and I
very
want
much.
to add that invitation that, it's a rare opportunity to engage with the man himself. And the program that he'll be running will be supported with a Spark report. So it's not like you'll feel left out in any which way. It'll be lovely to see those of you, many of you in the group, of course, are Lumina practitioners, but many of you have engaged with us at some point or the other. And it's a great way to learn more about Lumina and maybe move one step closer to the community. So if you can make it, it'll be fantastic to see you. It's going to be in Bangalore, Bombay, and Gurgaon. So I think you have the information now in the chat box.
Yes. Thank you everyone for attending, and we'll be sharing an email with your resource. So hope you find that useful as well, and hope to see you in our next webinar, which will be on 12th February at the same time. And we'll be discussing another link to personality and innovation. So see you there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Hey, Arti.